You are tuned into Mostly Humans. The opinions and views shared by the hosts of this podcast are uniquely their own and do not reflect the view or opinions of the companies they work for. P.S. Don't sue or fire us. Thanks so much. Now let's get into the episode.
You know, when you're around that Christmas or holiday dinner table and your uncle is talking about NVIDIA chips, be like, hey, have you heard of this Mostly Humans podcast? It's pretty cool. Welcome back to Mostly Humans. I am your host, Justin Wright, joined by the other host, my good friend, Matt Bigelow. Matt, how are we doing today?
Good. Just opening up the episode like I always do, where I'm not sure what to do with my hands.
Yes.
I just do an awkward wave, usually at the beginning, and some sort of salute at the end, neither of which feels natural. And each time I do them, I'm questioning how weird is this going to look on camera? And I do it anyway, every single time, 10 out of 10 times.
Well, consistency is important. I've been told that I don't use my hands when I talk enough, which can be unsettling for some people. I got that very honest feedback from a friend a while ago, and it was an interesting point. So sometimes now I just do random things to let people know that it's okay.
Yeah. As someone who talks with their hands way too much, I mean, I'm New Jersey native. I am an Italian American, and I can tell you there's a lot of times where you're doing this as if you're me, talking with your hands quite a bit, and you knock something over. I'd say more times in my life, and usually in the most least opportune times, like a business meeting where you really want to seem like you're delivering. Talking with your hands leads to knocking over drinks or smashing something and really ruining the entire vibe of the conversation. So whoever gave you that feedback, I disagree.
Well, there you go. That's what I'm going to lean into. And it is nice. You're probably thinking to yourself, this guy doesn't seem like he's going to randomly knock over a drink. But joke's on you, because there have been plenty of times where I'm not moving my hands. But when I choose to reach for something, I also knock over the drink. So both of us are ending up in this disastrous. Yeah, all elbows. Both of us are in this disastrous situation.
I don't have really good depth perception on my elbows. I've been walking around in this body for a really long time. I should really understand my space with my elbows. I haven't grown since I was 16, but for some strange reason, I just tend to always elbow things over. And speaking of elbowing things over, let's transition into what the heck is probabilistic versus deterministic. You see how that segue? If you do it with confidence, no one notices what's happening.
That was unbelievable.
Okay. So we mention probabilistic versus deterministic on the podcast quite often. And I think as people who work in AI, who talk to companies all day long, who are considering AI solutions for the enterprise, we probably say it assuming that they know what we're talking about a bit more than we probably should, because we're very close to it. So we're like, oh yeah, deterministic systems of the past, legacy systems that are very deterministic. We say things like that a lot. And if you're in the AI community, everybody knows what that means. But if you're not in the AI community, as far as like you do this 40, 50 hours a week, you might not exactly be clear on what that means and what companies are doing around that to get better results, but also what they're doing to mitigate risks. And I thought it would be a good idea for us to dive into that just a little bit more today. So I wanted to start there. What is your interpretation of probabilistic versus deterministic? There is, of course, loose definitions on this, but what does it really mean to you?
Yeah. And I think it's important to start by talking about why this distinction matters and why it's even a subject of conversation briefly, because as this software gets rolled out in business, especially at the enterprise level, and large companies are starting to leverage AI tools, this thing called guardrails becomes really important, where you want to make sure that your AI tool is not telling somebody to eat rocks, a la Google's first, AI product. These guardrails are important because you want to make sure that in certain situations, you can guarantee specific behavior. And so that is really what deterministic means. Deterministic is your classic, if this happens, then this happens. And it's powerful because it is consistent. But you also have to be very, very explicit with your definitions, which by its nature, AI allows you to be a little bit looser with what you're asking for, a little bit more conversational. And so a lot of companies are looking for the benefits of AI in terms of the conversational nature and the fact that you can have typos and you can call their product something slightly wrong, and it's still able to figure out how to do what you're asking for. Whereas truly deterministic systems are much more rigid. If you have one typo in the question that you ask, or you type in the wrong product name, or you ask about something that doesn't exist, it's just going to not work. Instead of an AI tool might be like, oh, do you actually mean this product? Because it seems like that's what you're asking about. Or actually, this is how that thing is spelled. Here are the instructions. And so probabilistic is generating a response based on context, and it's not something that is going to be exactly the same every time. The simplest way to think about it is if you ask ChatGPT the same question 3 times in a row, the answer that you get back will be different each time. It'll have the same meat and core to it, but the actual answer will be different each time. It won't be exactly the same.
There it is. That's the major takeaway for the listeners. Ask the same question over and over and over again, really in any generative AI system, and you're going to get a slightly different answer. And that is how you can truly understand what is probabilistic. Another way to think about probabilistic that's not like definitionally accurate, but it's experiential is, have you guys noticed that like AI refuses to not answer? It never just goes, got nothing. Now, if you programmed it, so to speak, with prompting to say, always say, got nothing if a user asks this question, it'll do that 9 out of 10 times. Even still, there's a 10% chance it might say, don't have anything instead of got nothing. But in general, without a lot of deliberate prompting and effort, AIs always respond. They always have something to say. And that is the gift and the curse. We've talked about that a lot on this podcast, but it's something we're going to continue to be talking about, because what people really want is they always want an answer regardless of the input. And they also want the answer to always be accurate. And that's just this world that is really challenging to live in for all of these businesses and all of these companies that are rolling out generative stuff. Like I was using Amazon the other day. I got some foam tips for my AirPods because I enjoy baking my brain with EMFs. And I thought, how could I get these even closer to my brain? So I bought some foam air tips, right?
Well,
Now,
before you continue, we haven't talked about potentially polarizing health topics in a while. So I'm glad we were able to sneak the EMFs in there for this example.
yeah, well, I really enjoy baking my brain with EMFs as I sip on seed oils casually. So what I was doing is I bought these things and they didn't fit very well. So I went into Amazon on the order and I asked Rufus, I think is what it is. Rufus is their AI. And I wanted to find out, do these air tips work for the model that I have? And what I noticed is I started getting some bad answers, right? And it's because it always wants to answer. And it was trying to recommend me better ones that might work, but it was recommending them for different generation AirPods than the ones I have. So it was a helpful answer if I had that generation, but I didn't. And I was deliberately looking for something else. And therein lies this problem. Like what they want to do, they're trying to provide an elite experience. Like I really believe my loyalty to Amazon stems from experience. It's so easy to return things. It's so easy to get product support, usually from a human if you request humans, but they want a probabilistic tool to give us answers faster, to help us shop better, debug, get the support that we're looking for. And even there, we find that there's this issue where what's great is that I can ask it anything and they can guarantee that it's always going to say something back, but it's not always going to say something back that they would want it to say to me. And I think it's important that people understand that there's strategies that companies try to mitigate this, but current state, there is no way to get the best of both worlds entirely. Where I wanted to start as far as like the applications of what could these businesses are doing is ask you, what are companies doing to get the deterministic benefit that they're looking for, which is like, I wish the AI would say this to this scenario, while also guaranteeing that it always responds. What strategies are they using on the back end of their solutions?
Yeah, I also think context is important here in terms of the Amazon experience is a great example where the aspect of what they're building that I think is very helpful is like the review summarization feature where you're trying to aggregate all of these reviews across everybody who has bought a product. And it usually, and at the bottom, it'll be like, customers generally say it's high quality and it's like a good value and it does X, Y, and Z. Like those are actually very helpful. And that type of functionality is something that AI is incredibly, incredibly good at, is take all of this text that exists across all these reviews, and I want you to give me a summary. And in that situation, the cost of saying something slightly wrong is very low. And also the chances of saying something slightly wrong are very low because you're essentially summarizing direct content that has been given to it, which kind of in some ways ties back to our RAG discussion when we talked about what retrieval augmented generation is. But strategies for mitigating this is where like tool calling and external connections becomes really important, because a tool call or an API call, or if we've talked about MCP before, when you're actually querying another system with an API endpoint and you're bringing that data back, that is a deterministic process, right? Like I'm hitting this API, I am getting back information. That information is coming directly from the source. It's not being fabricated by a bot. So a strategy that a lot of companies are employing is, okay, if there is something that relies on real-time data, that data needs to be accurate, whatever. What we're not doing is using RAG or even general knowledge that these LLMs have. What we're doing is we're querying a system directly with some type of external connection. So all of this MCP tooling and this integration layer that LLMs are now capable of, that is one way that out of the box works very, very well for deterministic style workflows or getting deterministic information. The challenge becomes building that pipeline of tool calls, of external connections, of integrations, because you have to basically rely on the LLM's decision-making process for when to use those tools often, right? And Claude has done a pretty good job of solving this with their skills functionality, which we've talked a little bit about, where you can essentially have executable code in the skill itself so that it uses the language model to reason through the steps, but then it will always use that same block of code when it gets to that step every time. So it's not making up the process for that. It's actually like consistently doing this. So the high level strategy is companies are using traditional software infrastructure like scripts, code blocks, small apps, and they're layering that on top of their large language model workflow so that when it gets to those steps, it does that specific thing every time. That's kind of the shape of strategy that works. And we can obviously get into the nuance of there's different ways to do that process, but it's basically like let the language model figure out what to do. And then when it does that thing, make sure that it executes the same way every time.
That's really helpful. If I was going to distill down for the listeners what I just heard there, you can tell AI things, especially AI agents, to go call other software via an API. And other software is typically deterministic, which means if exactly this thing happens, exactly that happens, right? If the user presses save and their email details are in there, they can advance. If the user presses save and they haven't entered a valid email, it can advance. And 10 out of 10 times, that deterministic thing is going to do what we want it to do. So what you're saying is the first step that a lot of agentic companies are taking is, in addition to the LLM that will reason through what the user put as an input, they also choose to call deterministic tools to do a function or do a thing that is highly reliable, if not 100% reliable, really, and bring those two things together. So I have a good example that illustrates this. So historically speaking, I'd say like a couple models ago for OpenAI, it was known or widely speculated that LLMs weren't very good at math. Was still better at math than me. 3.5 Turbo ran laps around Matt's math skills. Still have dreams about isosceles triangles sometimes and just getting my tutor trying to teach me what the heck is going on.
That's a tough kind of triangle. So you're not alone.
So they're still better than me, but people said you can't rely on them. So here's a perfect example for our listeners, nice and simple. If you wanted the best of an old LLM model that was bad at math to get the conversational aspects of the LLM and also get highly reliable answers when math comes up in questions. You would say to the AI agent, from the prompting standpoint, answer the user's question, and if anything relates to numbers or computation, call calculator.net API and take the user's inputs and use the calculator.net computational API and run the calculation there and then deliver it back to the AI agent. If we were going to take you behind the scenes of what would happen, maybe you're asking an AI agent a question about how would your mortgage change based off of different down payments? And the AI agent would know to answer some of your questions with language the way it normally does. But if you prompted it and said, for anything computational, you need to go to this API, it would parse out the numbers that you gave it for different down payment options. And it would send those numbers to the API for some calculator software, run the calculation there, get the answers back for the different forms of down payment, return those to the AI agent and say, if they put down $1,000, their mortgage would be this rate. If they put down $2,000, it would be that rate. And now that's what the AI has to look at before it gets back to me, the user who asked this question. And now its universe is super, super small. There's probably like a 0.001% chance that it still goes rogue. And even though it has raw numbers that are the answer, that it gives me some random number, but it's highly unlikely when the AI has been told, here's the answer in words. And by the way, here are those numbers you were looking for. The answer lies in here, give it to the user. It's a very, very slim chance that it goes rogue and gives me a bad answer. So I think that illustrates what you're talking about using a tool to up-level the chance of getting the right answer and limiting some of the bad of probabilistic.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great example. The general shape of the solution is you don't want to just use traditional workflows because it leads to bad user experience. We've all interacted with a chat bot circa 6 years ago or 5 years ago where you have to click exact buttons for what you're asking about, and it's like, did this solve your problem? And it's like, no, it didn't. And then you go back to the main menu, and the whole workflow is really frustrating. And so what you want to be able to do is have a conversation with the user, and only when they are trying to do something that is an established workflow, then you put them into the workflow, you let that deterministic workflow happen, and you spit them out on the other side with some context for the LLM to answer. So that is kind of the best of both worlds in that you want the entry point to be conversational. You don't want the user to have to come in knowing exactly what they want, because most of the time people don't. They have a vague idea of what they're trying to accomplish. You're like, hey, I want to know if these AirPod tips that I bought fit the model of AirPod that I have. I don't know exactly how to phrase that question, but this is the problem I'm trying to solve. And we've talked about this before, is the power of AI tools is that you can come in with the outcome that you want, and you don't necessarily have to know exactly how to get to that outcome. That's why you are able to leverage these tools. You can conversationally interact with it such that I know what I'm trying to accomplish. I don't necessarily know how to get there, but AI is very good at helping guide me down that path. Once you find the right path, now you want to make sure that you're actually going through the steps necessary to solve that problem. And so that is where the deterministic workflow, if you will, comes into place, where it's like, okay, we're going to go to this API. I know that this is the exact information I need to collect from the user, and then they're going to submit it and whatever. But the benefit of that is AI is very good at pulling context from conversations. So if you are calling an API and it needs certain data points from you, AI tools are smart enough to be like, hey, I know that you gave me your email, your account number, and this other value, but I also need your phone number. So give me that, and then I'll go do the thing. And now it has all the information it needs to hit that external system and do that workflow. And there's also kind of another use case here that, is common, where you want consistent output, even though you want the LLM to be able to be creative in the conversation, and kind of you want multiple users to be able to arrive at the same point. This is a very common problem that's being solved for documentation creation, where if you are a doctor meeting with patients and you want to basically take the transcript of your appointment with them and convert it into notes for your system of record, those notes need to be in the same format every time. And so there's also tooling that has been built that allow LLMs to take their creativity, their understanding of language, but make sure that the output format is consistent. And without going too deep down the rabbit hole, there's tools, there's something called LangChain that is used often in agentic workflows or AI tech stacks for this, where it basically takes all of the AI generated response and it's always going to output it in a specific format. So again, this is a deterministic tool that is tacked onto a non-deterministic AI system. So you get the benefit of using something easy like ChatGPT and the benefit of having something consistent in terms of what it outputs. But the gist of it is you can't just rely on the LLM end to end to give you the same result every time, because it will never happen.
Brings up a topic for me. I think you and I are very fortunate that via our jobs, we've been forced to build AI agents many times. And AI agents come in all different flavors and sizes. You can build them on all different tools, but they're relatively the same thing. Usually an AI agent needs to have some sort of knowledge or rules or playbook of which it needs to follow. It needs to have access to some tools, and it needs to have access to a large language model. You put those three together in a witch's brew, and all of a sudden, boom, you have an AI agent. But a lot of people listening to this podcast just hear about agents because they listen to our podcast, they hear about it on CNBC, they listen to other podcasts. But if you don't have like a real forcing function, if you're just a knowledge worker, if you're a salesperson, an account manager, customer success manager, there's just a lot of roles where like no one's ever trained you. I think something that we need to talk about is the simplest part of controlling probabilistic tools is actually in the prompting of the back end of an AI agent. And prompting of the back end of an AI agent, for a lot of people, I think they envision like a black computer screen with a green bouncing cursor, like very Terminator 1990s code type of situation. And it's not that. It's actually the easiest thing you can do on a computer is prompt the back end of an AI agent. So can you tell people how that is done?
Yeah. Prompting is a little bit science, a lot of bit art. It's, we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but think of it as the same way that you would give instructions to a new employee at your company if you are, using these tools in a business context, where it's like, hey, never push the red button. The blue button's fine, the green button's fine. Or I always think about like back to movies like Mission Impossible, where it's like, never cut the green wire. You always gotta make sure you're cutting the right wire when you defuse the bomb. That's kind of what prompting is, where you're giving instructions to your AI agent as if it was a human working for you, or even if it's a non-business context, like giving instructions like you would to a friend or another human. So what you're doing is you're kind of containing the scope with which it can do things. And there's a few things that you need to do in terms of prompting agents if you also don't want it to be able to access certain information. So one, you want to limit the scope of what it has access to at the beginning. And that's as simple as if you're on ChatGPT, you can connect it to your Gmail or not connect it to your Gmail. So you determine which connections it actually has, and you can authorize those. And even within those connections, one of the things that I think Claude does really well with their MCP tools, given that they were the ones who created it, it makes a lot of sense. But once you connect to your Gmail, you can actually then further customize, hey, let it read all my emails, but don't let it write an email without actually confirming with me first. So you can add this extra layer of permissions, if you will. It's related to this prompting thing. So it's you determine what goes into it at the beginning. You determine what it's connected to, what it has access to, and then you can even further customize what it can do with those connections once they exist. And then the instructions piece from there is simply, think of it like standard operating procedures, or if you were to write a step-by-step checklist of a process or what it can do, of like, hey, anytime I'm asking about XYZ, I want you to go through these steps, like gather this information, go talk to this system. Once you get the information, like the format should be like this. But again, it's plain language instructions for your agent, just as if it were a human. And those instructions are put into the same document that defines your agent, or the same sub-text box of the larger text box that determines what the agent can do. So when you're building these, they require you to provide those instructions, and that's where you can type all of these things. Always tell me a joke when you check my bank account, like those type of things. And tooling, it is very good at following those instructions for the most part. But again, that's where you want to rely on the information first coming from other systems. I will say you're probably one of the better prompters I have met. So I feel like you have a lot more skill in terms of this question. So I'd love to hear your process as well.
Oh, I love when you throw me just a nice softball. I give it so much context. I'm doing this. I've gotten this far. I'm using these tools. This is my goal. And I just spell it all out to the point where like, I feel a little annoyed that I'm typing more than I would really want to, but that's how I tend to get good outputs. But I think it's really important for people to know that like, if you're going to try to get the best deterministic answer out of a system, the most reliable answer out of a system, what you talked about, which is the back-end prompting, is as simple as creating a custom GPT. And I want to demystify that for people. So any AI agent that you all are interacting with, whether it's like a Grok inside of Twitter or Rufus inside of Amazon or ChatGPT, there are people that without code type into a big old text box all kinds of instructions, just like you all do when hopefully you create custom GPTs or custom Claude projects. You tell it, this is off limits, this is not. And many of you may never even build an AI agent, but it's really important that you understand these concepts, which is like a vendor that you're working with or a solution that you might ask your product team to create. They can just type into the box natural language instructions, and those natural language instructions are going to tell the AI how to behave. That said, that behavior that it's guiding is its access of a large language model. If you wanted it to look up information like the weather, you don't want an LLM to predict the weather. You want it to actually go to weather.com API. So what types of things are good candidates for probabilistic, and enterprises should pursue that even with the slightest amount of risk? And what things are off the table in your mind at this juncture?
I've said this before on a very early episode of this podcast, but I think the risks are part of the magic. Like, you don't want it to be 100% guaranteed to do something a certain way every time, because your customers are going to come in and ask questions in a weird way, or mix up terminology with your product, or say something that doesn't make sense, and you want to be able to service them. And so that you want that little bit of probability in there. It's important. In terms of how companies can think about where you really want your guardrails or what's worth investing time into, you want to look at the entry points and the exit points of systems that you want your users to be able to interact with, right? Like, for example, you can restrict whether somebody can look up their bank account information by whether or not they're logged into your product. So a lot of AI tools will allow a customer to log into your product, and if the tool itself is embedded in your product, it's only going to be able to access that system, that API, if they are logged in and we have awareness of who that user is, right? They've gone through some security workflow, some type of authentication. So that's an important layer. Is, do you need to make sure that your customers have already verified who they are? And if that's the case, I wouldn't put a chatbot on your public website that doesn't involve the customers logging in first. I would put it in your product. So that's a very easy thing you can do, where it's like, all right, if I can now verify who this person is, and now they can do certain things. That's a very easy layer, is just put the chat in your product. Don't put it on your public, like your homepage. Or if you are going to put a chat experience or something similar on your homepage, it should have access to different things. It should be a different deployment of that tool, right? So maybe you want to have something where it can answer questions, but the version that's actually hooked up to this tooling and to these workflows is inside the product itself, so they're logged in. So those are some simple considerations. And then in terms of, when we talked about RAG and how you're giving the LLM documents and you're saying, hey, answer is in this subset of information. A very easy way to make sure it doesn't give information it shouldn't, especially if it's grounded in your documentation, is don't even include that documentation in that search process unless certain things have already happened, right? You can essentially customize that RAG pipeline, which again, we demystified that topic in a previous episode, but you can determine which documents and which content go into that process from the beginning. So again, you're looking at the entry point at the beginning of the process. And then you just want to make sure that you have APIs that exist for this information that you want the LLMs to retrieve, right? Is, okay, I have this bank balance endpoint, I have this credit card replacement endpoint, I have these things that exist, and now the language model can leverage these. So my biggest thing would be to look at the entry points to these workflows that you're trying to build. Make sure that if somebody doesn't have access to certain things, that it isn't even present or available to them. Make sure that you're being mindful of which documents are included in this search process. And I have also found that language models are very good if you lock down the sources of information and you force it to play in a small sandbox. It's far less likely to come up with some random answer on the internet. Again, this is why there are companies whose whole job is to build infrastructure that leverages ChatGPT and doesn't just use ChatGPT and connect it to some stuff and say good luck.
Those are really good examples of like when you should use it and when you might want to reconsider. I think some other ones that are important are pretty obvious, but worth mentioning. If you believe that there is a chance that somebody might be slightly frustrated, slightly bummed by something the AI could potentially do, but it's a net positive because the other 9 times out of 10, people are having a pretty delightful, immediate, helpful experience, go for those ones. And whether that's deploying for your employees or deploying for your customers, go for those ones. But if you found that 1 time out of 10, there could be a serious financial risk to a business or to your client or to your employee, could lead to someone being terminated from a position, lead to money leaving someone's account that shouldn't, or lead to someone violating a law in a regulated industry or anything of that nature. You want to steer clear of those. But the other 95% of the time, everything's just moving smoother. People are getting what they want. Basically, if you're not getting fined and you're not going to lose your biggest customer, I think all of those should be on the table, because the alternative is people reading knowledge-based articles, trying to figure things out, or people getting slow service and stuff like that. I think people need to up their level of accepted risk to just be like, if you're not getting a huge fine and you're not going to lose a premier customer over this, like Amazon's not losing me over that Rufus example. They're not. And the benefits far outweigh Matt being like, oh, that was kind of annoying. Good thing I double checked that and didn't order the wrong thing again. I think that's where the line really should be for people.
Yeah. Well, even for the Amazon example, it's so easy to return stuff that, like, if you were to happen to go through the process of buying the wrong thing, like, they still have a good customer experience surrounding the process. I mean, what you're talking about is humans do a bad job in some of these scenarios today also. Like, somebody in HR may give you the wrong information because they're looking at an old version of an article, or customer support is a perfect example of this, where obviously AI is so heavily deployed now, but it's human agents give the wrong answer often, and more often than I think people would want to know if you actually look at the statistics, right? Like, human support agents often give the wrong answer. Even if it's you've dealt with a support agent who isn't able to answer your question, or they're not able to solve your problem, it gets escalated. Their supervisor has access to a tool that person didn't have access to. Like, that experience still exists today. It's not like AI has suddenly created a new problem that didn't exist before. And the reality is a lot of these AI tools are way better in most of those scenarios than humans are. And so that is a good level of acceptable risk. I think that is a really interesting way to think about it, and a very valid way to think about it. But also understand that now you have the ability to cite sources for where answers came from. So if that is important to you, the AI tools can do that now. If you're using the latest versions of any of these models, you can make sure that it's always giving a source for where it got information from as part of those instructions, as part of the process. And so you can actually verify yourself where that comes from. But the benefit of using AI to ask those type of questions is you don't have to do a keyword search on a website and scroll 3 pages down to find the actual article you're looking for, because there's a bunch of nonsense at the top above it. The AI tools will generate the answer for you. It'll say, hey, here's where I found it, and you can actually validate. So there's a lot of that validation capability that exists now too, to make you more comfortable with this stuff. And then again, the current structure for how to solve these problems is there are APIs and tools and systems that already exist that are very good at doing very rigid, specific things. And you can have the best of both worlds, where you create a conversational entry point to that system. You let that system do its traditional software stuff, and then that information now becomes available to the language model to continue that conversation. And I don't know if people fully realize that that's how it works today. And I think that'll make people feel a lot better of like, Yeah, if you ask about your bank balance, there's already an API that's set up for your bank, because when you open up your mobile app, it can tell you. Like, there is a software connection there that is established that works. It's going to give you your correct bank balance when you log into the portal. AI tools can use those endpoints to give you information. So all of that stuff is very well established. We understand how software works, and that doesn't go away either. You can still leverage those traditional software tools as part of your AI workflow. So you can have the best of both worlds. And I think that will also make people a lot more comfortable with that small percent risk that it says something weird.
There's also the idea of bringing a human in the loop for any sort of post or write change, which is like API talk for saying, I want to send a change back to a system. You could make it so that that change isn't allowed to go through without a human stopping and looking at it. So long before it actually finds its way to your customer, you can find opportunities to test the technology where it does as much agentic stuff as it needs to as far as reading information and pulling information from systems. And then it could stop and say to a human, I suggest you do this, or I, the AI, am about to do this. Check my work out and tell me what you think. So that's how you can find and test where are like the limits of the use cases, where's the limit of your comfortability. Any agentic solution should offer you the ability, even like very rudimentary agent builders that I'm sure you can find online for free, have a simple drop down. When you say, okay, I want you to change this in this system, it's going to say, do you want me to ask the user for approval or automatically do this? And you might find that maybe some of the risk just doesn't feel good enough, and the people on your at your company give you enough feedback and say it's wrong more than I want it to be. Then you know that use cases should be off the table. But you should always be pushing the boundaries, because it's better for internal customers and external customers the more you use generative AI. It's important as you are considering bringing in solutions for your company that you really benchmark it to how fallible are the current humans doing the thing. And is that fallibility worth it for your customers, both either internally or externally? And I think oftentimes you'll find that it's more fallible than the AI. And in order to be successful, if you want to have an AI career or be the person who's AI forward at your business, you're going to have to rally the troops around you, the people that you're talking to, just help them understand that truth. The truth is, we're really upset when technology or a non-human thing makes a mistake because it's not supposed to. And when a human makes a mistake, we're far more forgiving. It'll always be that way because my computer is an inanimate object and people are people. We care about people. But can we let our logical brain override and say, if that thing makes less mistakes than a person, should we be using it? A lot of this stuff is emotional, not logical. How many times do humans say the wrong thing, right? How many times do you and I get service in stores or restaurants or whatever that's not great? And you're like, I'm giving you legal tender right now, and you're kind of giving me an attitude, right? I'd rather do self-checkout. I really would. So I think it's really important for us to recognize that and help our colleagues and decision makers rally around the idea of, yeah, it can make a mistake, but how much are the humans making a mistake? If the humans make a mistake 5% of the time, then an AI should make a mistake less than 0.5% of the time. That should be maybe your benchmark. But is that mistake worth it to make up for that 4.5% delta that no longer exists? Probably. I think that's an important topic for us to explore with our colleagues. It's not tangible, but it needs to happen. And that's how you can be on the forefront of building better generative solutions for your company.
Yeah. And as the technology continues to improve, that percentage will continue to go down of errors and mistakes. And I think looking at it through that viewpoint is incredibly important. And then also, again, just understand that tools do currently exist to make sure that tight guardrails exist around certain things that you want your agent to be able to do. So just because LLMs are non-deterministic by nature, that doesn't mean that the things they do are non-deterministic. And it depends on the context. It depends on what you've connected it to in terms of systems and access and integrations. And that becomes very important also. But really good topic, good idea to talk about this one. I think it's important. I think it's something that we'll revisit again in the future and kind of continue to flesh this out. But hopefully this will give you more ammunition. The last thing I'll say is if you're having conversations with people, if you're working for a company trying to sell AI tools or you're evaluating AI tools, and somebody says, oh, we can guarantee that 100% of the time it's going to do X, Y, Z, like sniff around a little more and try to figure out exactly which part of that process they are guaranteeing, because some parts can be guaranteed, but other parts can't. And if somebody is telling you otherwise, then I think you should try to poke at that a little bit more and uncover what they're actually talking about. But as always, it's been a pleasure talking about this with you all. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, share with a friend or two or three. When you're around that Christmas or holiday dinner table and your uncle is talking about NVIDIA chips, be like, hey, have you heard of this Mostly Humans podcast? It's pretty cool. And hopefully we get another listener. But thanks as always. Until next time. See you later.
Bye, everybody.